beginning with verse 23, it says, "Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more, in labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. From the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, and perils among false brethren." Paul was devoted. So, are we true believers? Are we devoted? Or are we just going through the motions? A true believer has a new citizenship. In Ruth 1, verse 16, it says, "But Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave you or turn back from following you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." She severed ties with her former life, her family, her nation, everything that she knew, she severed ties with. Our citizenship is not in Moab or Palestine. Our citizenship is in heaven. The true believer has a new citizenship. Luke 9, verse 62 says, well, if I can turn the page. Luke 9, verse 62. "But Jesus said to them, No one, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God." Our citizenship is in heaven, and we have to sever the ties with our relationship here. Doesn't mean that we have to stop being citizens of the nation that we belong to, but our loyalty has to be in heaven. In Matthew 6, verse 24, we read, Matthew 6, verse 24, it says, "No one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." And mammon is translated in some translations as money. Cannot serve God and money. In Ephesians 2, verse 19, Ephesians 2:19 says, "Now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God." We have a new citizenship, and that's in heaven. So, how about us? Have we severed our ties with things that would keep us from being citizens in heaven or not? I had a friend who used to say that some people have too much of the world in them to be happy as Christians, and too much of Christianity in them to be happy in the world. And that's kind of a sad situation, isn't it? But that, I think, is the case with some people. So is our citizenship in heaven, or are we trying to maintain dual citizenship? A true believer is determined. In Ruth 1, verse 18, it says, "When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her." That is, Ruth, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped talking. In Luke 8, beginning with verse 4, Luke 8, beginning with verse 4, it says, "And a great multitude had gathered, and they came to him from every city. He spoke by a parable. A sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and it was trampled down, and the birds of the air devoured it. Some fell on rock, and as soon as it sprang up, it withered away because it lacked moisture. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked it out. In verses 13 and 14, Jesus explains the parable. It says, "But the ones on the rock are those who, when they hear, receive the word with joy, and these have no root, but believe for a while, and in time of temptation fall away. Now the ones that fell among the thorns are those who, when they have heard, go out and are choked with cares and riches and pleasures of life, and bring no fruit to maturity." The true believer is determined. It's easy to become discouraged if we see the church not growing as fast as we would like for it to. Somebody might offend me. It's easy to become discouraged, but maybe the fault is that I'm not determined to do my part. The true believer is determined. In Ruth 2, in verse 2, it says, "So Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, 'Please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him in whose sight I may find favor.' And she said to her, 'Go, my daughter.'" The true believer is industrious. Naomi didn't ask Ruth to go out and glean. That was Ruth's idea on her own. That was hard work. But she was industrious. She was a self-starter. And she was a hard worker. We know that because in verse 7, well, let's start with verse 6. "So the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered and said, 'It is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab.' And she said, 'Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves.' So she came and has continued from morning until now, though she rested a little while in the house." She was a hard worker, but she was industrious. As Christians, we're to be industrious. In Colossians 3, verse 23, it says, "And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men." So not only in our lives as Christians, in our obligation to God, are we to be industrious, but in everything we do. In Colossians 4 and verse 5, it says, "Walk in wisdom towards those who are outside, redeeming the time." Time is the most important commodity that we have. Sometimes we make statements like, "Let's do this again." Well, you can't do that again. That's gone. It's not coming back. We are required as Christians to make the best use of our time. And if we do that, then we will convert people. The church will grow. And I'm talking to myself, probably more so than I'm talking to anybody else. We are all to be industrious. We're to be good managers of our time and our money. God requires us to be good stewards of the resources that we have. So Are we true believers? Are we working for God, or are we working for ourselves? The true believer is meek. Look at Ruth 2, beginning with verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "You will listen, my daughter, will you not? Do not go to glean in another field or go from here, but stay close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." So she fell on her face, bowed down to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" Ruth didn't think she was worthy to even be talked to by Boaz because she was a foreigner. Why have you taken notice of me? She was meek and humble. Meek rhymes with, but is not synonymous with, weak. We're told that Jesus was meek, but he wasn't weak. He made a whip and drove the money lenders and the animals and the changers, the money, out of the temple of God. That wasn't weak. But then, not long after that, he went to God in prayer and said, "If it's your will, let this cup," in other words, his death and suffering, "pass from me. But not my will, but your will be done." Jesus was meek, but not weak. Webster's 7th New Collegiate Dictionary, which is somewhat out of date, that's the dictionary I had in college, but I don't think the definition has changed that much. Webster's 7th New Collegiate Dictionary defines meek as enduring injury with patience and without resentment. That isn't easy, is it? Somebody does something mean and nasty to me, it's not my inclination to be meek and endure that without resentment and to be mild. It's my inclination to do something mean and nasty back, but that's not what we're allowed to do as Christians. And what was the first thing that Jesus said when he was nailed to the cross? "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." That's meek, but that's not weak. And here again, I don't think I could have done that. And when the people came by, the religious leaders came by and said, "If you're the Christ, come down from the cross and we'll believe you," I think I would have said, "Okay, I'm coming." But that was not what Jesus did. And it's a good thing for us that he didn't. Matthew 5 and verse 5, in what's commonly referred to as the Beatitudes, we're told that the meek will inherit the earth. And for a long time, that made no sense to me. And in a way, it still doesn't. But the story is told of and I assume this is a true story. I haven't researched it, but there was a gospel preacher in the late 1800s by the name of Tant, and some of his sons and grandsons are still preaching today, I think. But he evidently was an impeccable dresser, that he was always dressed to the T. And one day, supposedly, someone came up to him and said, "Mr. Tant, you look like you own the world." And he is supposed to have said, "I don't, but my Father does." That's a true statement, isn't it? And we are the inheritors of God, right? We're his children. Our Father owns the world. So, yeah, we are going to inherit it. Ruth 3, verses 1 through 5. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now Boaz, whose young women you were with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourselves and anoint yourself. Put on your best garment and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be, when he lies down, that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do." And she said to her, "All that you say to me, I will do." The true believer walks by faith. Now, Naomi had faith, or Ruth had faith in Naomi. That's not who we're to have faith in. We're to have faith in God. But she's an example to us of faith, isn't she? Because what Naomi told her to do, she said, "I'll do it." Abraham, in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 5, was told to leave the country that you live in and go to a place where I will show you. He didn't know where he was going. God said, "I'll tell you when you get there." And he hadn't seen the travel brochures. He had no idea where he was going. He got up and left. That takes faith. We don't understand everything that God does, and we don't have to ever understand everything that God does. But we have to believe it, and we have to comply with it. James 2, beginning with verse 1, says this: "My brothers, do not hold the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with partiality. For if there should come into your assembly a man with gold rings, with fine apparel, James 2:14, beginning with verse 14. Close. What does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Depart in peace, be warmed and filled,' but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." Ruth had faith in Naomi, but she did what Naomi asked her to do. If she hadn't, she wouldn't have had faith, would she? If the true believer has faith, he will do what God requires. And if we don't have faith. Ruth 2 and verse 11. And Boaz answered and said to her, "It has been fully reported to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and your mother and the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward given to you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." The true believer is concerned with the welfare of others. Ruth was concerned with her mother-in-law. She didn't have to go back to Judah with Naomi. She didn't have to go out and glean. She didn't have to bring back the food, the grain that she had gleaned back to her mother-in-law, but she was concerned with the welfare of Naomi. A true believer is concerned with the welfare and the needs of others. Her reputation had followed her. Even among the people who didn't know her, she had a good reputation. She had a reputation with Boaz as being concerned with her mother-in-law. Mark 12, verse 31, we're told to love your neighbor as yourself. That isn't easy, is it? That implies, however, that it's okay to love ourselves, because how can we love our neighbor as ourselves if we don't love ourselves? We're not required not to love ourselves. We're just required to keep that in perspective and love others as much as we love ourselves. And you know what? I love myself quite a bit. So, I need to have that same love towards those around me. Ruth 3 and verse 11. This is Boaz speaking. It says, "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman." The true believer is a person of good character. Everybody knew Naomi's character, even the people that didn't know her. She had the reputation of being a good woman. When people saw Ruth, they saw a virtuous person. They saw a woman of loyalty. They saw a woman of devotion. They saw a woman of dignity. They saw a person who was honest. They saw a person who was trustworthy. They saw a person who was pure in their actions. You know, the world judges the truth by the world judges the church by what they see in us. And if I am not a person of good character, whether it's fair or not, people are going to judge the church by my character. If I'm a person of good character, they're going to believe the church is a place where they might like to worship God. If they believe that if I'm not a person of good character, they're not going to want to have anything to do with the church. The true believer is a person of good character. And related to that, in Exodus 20 and verse 7, and what we generally refer to as the Ten Commandments, it says, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." New International translates that, "You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God." I'm to be concerned with God's reputation and not just mine. And when my language is not as it should be, that reflects on God. And maybe not taking his name in vain is more than just not using profanity. Maybe it's the way I live my everyday life. Because how I live my everyday life reflects on God and His church. The true believer is a person of good character. Ruth 14, beginning with verse 13. I have a little trouble reading this every time without getting choked up, so I'm going to try not to. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went in to her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name become famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. The true believer is a blessing. Ruth was a blessing to Naomi, but not just to Naomi. She was a blessing to Israel because she was the great-grandmother of David, and she was one of at least 3, maybe 4 Gentiles in the lineage of Jesus. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and maybe Bathsheba, because Bathsheba was married to a Hittite, right? And the Jews were not really supposed to marry the Hittites. They could marry some foreigners, but the ones that were terrible idolaters, they weren't supposed to marry. So Bathsheba may very well have been a Gentile too. Don't know that. It's possible. But Ruth was a blessing to Naomi, a blessing to the Jewish nation, and a blessing to us because she was in the lineage of Christ. Remember Sodom in Genesis 19? If God had found 10 righteous people, He wouldn't have destroyed the city. Couldn't find them. So we are to be a blessing to those around us. We're to be a blessing to our nation. We're certainly to be a blessing to the church. Matthew 28, verses 18 and 20 tells us to go and preach the gospel. If we do that, we'll be a blessing to those around us. If we don't do it, we won't be a blessing. Most of us are never going to be accomplished preachers, may not be able to be a good classroom teacher, may not even be able to teach one-on-one very well. But we can all do something. Nobody is good at everything, but everybody's good at something. What do you know about Andrew? Not very much, do you? He's only mentioned a few times in the Bible. But one of the times he's mentioned was when he brought his brother Peter to see Jesus. What do you know about Peter? We know a lot about Peter, don't we? He became a tremendous teacher, tremendous preacher. But Andrew was the one who brought him to Jesus. All of us can be an Andrew. We're not all going to be Peters or Pauls, but we can all be an Andrew. So, are we exhibiting the characteristics of a true believer, or are we just going through the motions as Christians? I don't know. That's up to us. So, we finished up a little early this morning, but that's okay. If you can make it down to Hanlonier Church of Christ building this morning, We would love to have you in worship.